Hearthstone has had one of its biggest balance patches in history, and I've got 25 different decks to get you excited about WHIZBANG'S Workshop. Before we get started talking about the 25 decks that I have prepared for this video, I just want to give a huge shout out to everybody that has been subscribing to the channel, helping us reach our goal of 18K. If you like what we do, if you want to keep getting our updates as soon as they come out, go ahead and subscribe to the channel because we're also doing a giveaway right now to where if we hit 18K, we are giving away a mini set, we're giving away a bundle. It depends when it's going to happen, but as of right now, we've made some pretty considerable progress. We've made some progress, so to speak. Just wanted to give a huge thank you to everyone that's been helping support the content. Now, with that out of the way, let's talk about the meta because, oh, good lord, look at these stats distributions. Yeah, this is not looking the greatest, honestly, for all the other classes in Hearthstone, unless you really like Hunter and Paladin. Hunter and Paladin are back on top, but here's the thing that's really interesting about these decks being on top. They're not just good at regular diamond ranks and regular legend, they're actually seeing play in top legend now, and this is something that usually doesn't happen when Hunter and Paladin are on top. And of course, Warrior, there's Highlander Warrior. There's actually a lot of really interesting Warlock decks seeing play right now. But let's take a look at the HSReplay tier list and see what is good at Diamond through Legend, because as you can tell, Paladin Hunter on top. Spell Token Hunter is easily the best deck in the game right now if you are just trying to hit Legend very quickly, or either that or you need a deck that absolutely beats up on Hunter, and we will go through some of its weaknesses here in a second. But Flood Paladin is pretty much just Showdown Paladin, except it's got more minions that you just flood onto the field. We got Muster for Battle now into the deck, and we'll go over to the specifics here in a second. But Highlander Warrior, Handbuff Paladin, Breakfast Hunter, which is really just a weird Reno Hunter, Zarimi Priest, Sludge Warlock, Shopper Demon Hunter is even doing fine at Diamond through Legend now. So if you're someone that loves Demon Hunter, this deck is actually working, and when I played Sludge Warlock, I tend to have trouble with the Shopper Demon Hunters. Pain Warlock, Hero Power Druid, Dragon Druid, and Highlander Shaman, and then here's Tier 3 and Tier 4, which honestly, a lot of these decks do have potential, such as Nature Shaman, for example, to where if we look what's going on at top 1000, it's a little bit of a different picture to where Zarimi Priest is debatably the best deck in the game at top 1000 Legend, followed by Handbuff, Flood Paladin, Highlander Warrior, and somehow Sharper Demon Hunter. I feel like this is a new development. This isn't stats that could be trusted because if it doesn't have something like this, it's a very new emerging deck that needs more data to actually slot where it's supposed to be. There might be someone that's just high rolling with this deck right now. But Spell Token Hunter gets a little bit weaker because people are playing decks that aren't actually good against it. Zarimi Priest and Paladin are actually very good against Hunter right now. Pain Warlock, I'm not really seeing a lot of people play this deck. In fact, I haven't seen anybody play this archetype since it's been nerfed, so it's very shocking to see this here. But Highlander Shaman, Sludge Warlock, Dragon Druid, and even Rainbow DK are still surviving at top 1000 Legend. Now, Donkey kind of paints a little bit of a different story. So through Diamond through Legend, you still have Hunter, Paladin, Warrior, by far the most popular decks. Somehow WHIZBANG is popular enough to get 5,000 games specifically with Warlock, so I wonder if this is a bug right now, because I actually had 3 games of WHIZBANG Warlock in a row when I tried playing WHIZBANG. We'll go over that another day. But yeah, it's the same thing. Aggro Paladin, Highlander Warrior, Zarimi Priest, Token Hunter are the only decks that are really popping up on Donkey with over 3,000 games. If you go to top 10,000 Legend, it's around the same thing, except Zarimi Priest, Dragon Druid start to pop up a little bit. And then last but definitely not least, top 1000 Legend, it's Overheal Priest, Zarimi Priest, Handbuff Paladin, Highlander Warrior. Druids are actually starting to see play. There is some Alonius Druid seeing play at top 1000 Legend. I will have a video talking about this later when I actually learn the deck. But there's even like, Mining Rogue. Like there's a lot of stuff that's happening at top 1000 Legend. And when you just look at the surface of the meta, it does look like it's just Hunter, Paladin, Warrior. But once you start getting into the Legend ranks, you start seeing a lot more interesting decks, a lot more different ideas that people are trying to make work, and it's just really awesome. I like seeing the top 1000 Legend meta right now, but honestly, this is most people's experience, and this is what you have to think about when you are trying to hit Legend. So let's go ahead and talk about the best decks to hit Legend and why I'm choosing these specific lists with these specific tech cards. The first deck that we have to talk about, unfortunately, is Token Hunter. Now, as much as I don't like this archetype, because if your opponent has like an AoE or a well-timed lifesteal counter, then this can really knock Hunter off of its groove. And this is part of the reason why Hunter becomes a tier 2 deck at top 1000 Legend. Not because this deck isn't powerful, but you can easily play a deck that can bully Hunter players. And the reason why I'm going to be suggesting this version of the deck in particular is because I'm very shocked to see Hunter players not playing Kill Command. It just really doesn't make sense to me, where you're trying to kill your opponent as quickly as possible. Kill Command was one of the best cards in Hunter back in the day, so you definitely want this card in your deck. This is the Ron Mexico version of Token Hunter, which I have seen him play at top 100 Legend. He is a Hunter main, and he would only play the best Hunter deck, and this is the most popular Hunter deck, I believe, on Donkey at top 1000 Legend. So if you want to play this version of the deck, I do believe it is the best one. It's got a lot of different tempo turns with cards like Ball of Spiders to give you extra minions, so that way you don't run out of gas. It's also very good to work with the location, for example. But one card I feel like it took a minute for some Hunter players to start playing, maybe it's common now, is actually the Painted Canvas Sword. If you guys remember, I think it was Crackling Razor Maw back during Ungoro, it was pretty much this, except on one minion. So being able to give your entire board giving your entire board bonus effects, that's just a really good ability that I feel like you would want in your deck. So this is probably the best version of the deck in my opinion. I would argue that you don't 100% need Agrimar. In fact, Ron Mexico maybe has cut this from his deck recently. But sometimes you just need a solid turn 6, and this can be like 15 attack over the course of 3 turns to help close the game by turn 8. So that's one reason why I still believe this card might be worth it. It's also card draw in some situations, or maybe board development if you really need the minions. But I do believe this might be the best way of playing Hunter right now, if your goal is just to hit Legend as quickly and as easily as possible. Now, I've got 2 different ideas for Flood Paladin here, but I'm going to start with a deck that I saw someone hit rank 2 Legend with on the first day of the grind yesterday. So this isn't like someone finishing rank 2, this is just someone using this deck to quickly hit Legend. So if anything, it does tell you how good this deck is, because it's just a very effective deck. It does its thing over and over again, and if your opponent doesn't have the answer to the Sea Giant showdown prismatic beam turn, then there's not a lot of things that a lot of players can do. And I've actually lost to this deck by turn 2. Not as in this deck has killed me by turn 2, but I went up against a showdown Ziliax. They traded into my board, and I had nothing on the field by turn 2. So yeah, that was fun. Minion count is very important to keep in mind when you are trying to counteract this deck. So the whole point of this deck is just to flood minions. You flood minions, you can buff them with Crusader's Aura, but even if you're not attacking with them, if you're just trying to set up a large board that sticks, now we are using the card Flash Sale, and if you don't have a good turn for your Crusader's Aura, this is a great turn 4 when you've already played cards like Coin, Boogie Down, Muster for Battle, or if you just have tempo with your 1s in your 2s, or like your Mining Casualties. But the Tiger Plushie actually finds its way into this deck because it does need a little bit of healing, but also the 1-mana mini is very, very useful to use alongside Crusader Aura, or to use in order to, get your Ziliax down as quickly as possible with a bunch of 1-mana minions. And even if you don't have enough sustaining power in order to kill your opponent, you do still have the Hearthstone brew in this deck, which honestly, at first I wasn't really sold on it, but it kind of makes sense, because if you have a situation to where your opponent just keeps clearing your board after board after board, if you just make another board, odds are they're going to be able to kill it anyway, so you need to play something that's going to give your opponent a little bit of an awkward time. So Hearthstone Brew is a little bit of an unpredictable situation that can happen on turn 6 if your board isn't sticking, and can give you a legitimate way of winning the game. So that's why I believe it might be good here. The one card I'm not really sold on is technically the Titan, just because this feels way too slow for a flood deck, but every now and again it might be good in order to get the +2/+2 later into the game, so it might have some potential for that. But this other version of Flood Paladin, I believe, might be a little bit of a better list, just because it cuts some of the legendaries that I'm not particularly sure about. Like Tarim, for example. Tarim's a really good card, but sometimes I wonder if this is really what you want in a Flood Paladin deck that's just trying to end the game by like turn 4, turn 5. But BananaGod, a well-known player at top 1000 Legend, actually recently went 12-2 in the Heroic Tavern Brawl with this version of the deck, and he's also playing this version of the deck on ladder. And one card in particular that's very interesting is the Jitterbug, which honestly can make a lot of sense, because something that this deck does lack is card draw. So the Jitterbug coming down by turn 4, if you don't already have minions on the field, is not only a really good turn 4 that's not limited to minions being generated already, but can also give you some extra card draw in order to set up for those big showdown turns. So this deck is probably a little bit better, and honestly, Jitterbug into Plushie, for example, turn 4 to turn 5, Something I just now thought about, wow, that's insane. That's like 3-card draw immediately for Paladin, and you want that for Paladin. So this might be the better way of playing this version of the deck, but we still got the Hearth in here. I don't, like, there are some people that are playing Leroy, and I don't believe that Leroy is the answer to this deck because it's the same issue that we're already running into where we're running out of gas and we just don't have enough damage and enough buffs to get there. So I think that Leroy is just more of a win more card to where you've already won the game and it's just extra damage, while Hearth actually gives you a way of being able to win the game when you don't have any actual win conditions left over. So in my opinion, I think Hearth is immediately better than Leroy in this particular deck, but if you got a deck with Leroy that's better than Paladin, feel free to let me know. I'll happily showcase it. But if you want to play Flood Paladin, this is going to be my overall recommendation. Next up, we have the Druid deck that took Hearthstone by storm, and honestly, this deck is starting to die down a little bit, and it's kind of sad, because I thought this was the most interesting Druid deck that we've seen emerge, because it's like a minion board-based hero power combo tempo weird deck, and the only thing I can really compare it to is like small minion mage or like a tempo mage back in the day with like arcane worms, a bunch of spells, and you know, every now and again you'd have like minions that would synergize very well with like your spell damage cards, and you'd have like this burst potential, and that's exactly what this deck feels. It feels like it has a lot of like mini burst combos to where it's never gonna deal like 30 all at once, but it can deal like 10, 12, another 10. So it's all about being able to wear down your opponent over the course of the entire game. So the thing I like the most about this list is just honestly how synergistic everything feels. You have the bottomless toy chest with the magical dollhouse to help with gigantic swipe clears, which is very important for Druid with the lack of AoE, but it also works very well with woodland critters. You have Peaceful Piper and Groovy Cat working perfectly to give you a gigantic hero power that synergizes great with Spread the Word to give you some extra card draws. You have the Dragon package. The dragons help you draw cards, and then you have Splish Splash Whelp in order to have big tempo turns that are possible with your Nest Matron. So there's just a lot of things going on with this deck, even the lifesteal with the Fi. You have enough dragons in order to just slap this card onto the field, because you've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 dragons already in the deck, because the miniature, don't forget about the miniature being another dragon. So Fi is actually very good and probably one of your best tools at being able to destroy Hunter. I believe this deck, when it draws perfectly, is unable to lose the Hunter unless the Hunter maybe just goes absolutely face and you have one bad turn. But again, like, this is the perfect situation to where you are always responding to the board. You always have the swipe in order to deal with the 1/1s, and Hunter just can't stick a board while you are constantly going ahead of them on tempo. So I think that this deck has a lot of capabilities of being a great Druid deck, to where if you've been missing the class or if you like minion-based strategies, then I would highly recommend this version of the deck, and there's already a video that I have covering this version in particular. So if you want more information about the mulligan and how to play this deck, go ahead and check out that video. But if you're someone that loves Druid and board-based gaming, this is probably going to be my biggest recommendation as like the most fun deck to play because you like board-based gaming. Next up is going to be the deck that I actually repaired my MMR with last season, and I had like 60 games with Sludge Warlock and ended with about a 60%. But Micaiah, a good friend of ours, ended up hitting top 100 with Sludge Warlock after climbing from 1,000 to top 100 in a single day. This was before the archetype had emerged onto the meta, and he went 18-2 against Highlander Warrior. Now, I've been having a little bit of struggle with Highlander Warrior because they have kind of adjusted. If you are going up against a good Highlander Warrior that has mulligan against Sludge Warlock, one of the best things that you can have in that matchup is, of course, Brand on 6, but specifically Ziliax. Ziliax is a card that you kind of have to think about when you're playing Sludge Warlock to bully on the Highlander Warriors, but this is a good aggressive deck that can not only bully Warriors, but can also bully the rest of the meta. We have a Defile specifically in this deck in order to bully on the Hunter, so that way we can get rid of like a Saddle Up board that is just way too sticky for this kind of deck in order to deal with, even though we do have potential crescendo combos. But by the time that Saddle Up comes down, you haven't really played a lot of fatigue cards, and you need a really good AoE in order to knock them off the field. So this is specifically for Hunter, but it still works with Sludge on Wheels in order to give you extra sludges on the bottom of your deck if you could set up the synergy somehow. So Defile seems like a really good card in my opinion for that reason. We have the 4-mana Ziliax in the deck that has the power module to double its attack and the Haywire module in order to have the stats. So it's a big minion that can just scam games every now and again. But your curve is very important. Sludge Warlock is actually in a really interesting position right now to where it feels very broken, but it feels very manageable in a lot of situations. Like, originally, I was playing the version of the deck that has Cult Neophyte over the Defile and the Chaos Creation, But when I was playing this deck, I was really missing my second copy of Chaos Creation in case it got milled somehow, and also just because I wanted the consistency of being able to end the game because I had a bunch of sludges at the bottom of the deck. So Cult Neophytes are unfortunately not the way to go for this archetype in my opinion, and Chaos Creation and Defile are definitely the way of making this the perfect 30. So if you're someone that loves Sludge Warlock and loves being a toxic gamer, then this deck is not only a powerhouse of being able to destroy Warrior, but can very easily restore your MMR and help you hit the legend ranks. And the last deck that I'm going to talk about as the best options to hit legend out of the diamond ranks is going to be Highlander Warrior. But honestly, all of these decks that I've talked about are very easily decks that you can take going into legend to get at the highest rank possible. But the other decks that are coming after the Brand Warrior are going to be decks that take a little bit more nuance or maybe a little bit more skill or more practice just because they are naturally harder archetypes. All of these decks that I have just shown you are debatably the easiest ways of being able to hit legend, to where I'm not even going to talk about this deck. We're already aware of what it does. Most likely Brand is going to get nerfed. I feel like this is just the safest thing to say right now, because when this card comes out by turn 5, turn 6, if you are not specifically a deck that is favored against Highlander Warrior, this is the nail in the coffin, or I guess the pick in the mine. It doesn't really sound as great as nail in the coffin. But regardless, dude, I just freaking hate this card. And honestly, I also want to use this moment to say that I absolutely despise Reno. I hate you. I hate you so much, Reno, but I unfortunately need to keep you in my collection because I need a full collection and I do need to highlight the good decks. But yeah, Reno makes me upset. I don't need to tell you why this deck is good. We all know why this deck is good, but it is still a great deck to play if you really want to hit legend. But I really do believe this is the most boring deck to be playing right now because it's just draw the good cards in the good order. Decisions really don't matter with Highlander Warrior, in my opinion. Just don't play the deck. It's not fun. It's not fun for me. It's not fun for you. It's robbing the opportunity of getting better at the game. Let's go ahead and talk about some decks that are going to be more skill-based and will legitimately make you a better Hearthstone player. I promise you. So the first deck that we're going to look into is actually a deck that completely bullies Highlander Warrior. And if you're someone that wants your decisions to matter and really wants to think about like the best turn every single turn, this is a very interesting deck that can be played as a tempo minion based deck, and then suddenly can transition into an OTK combo. And as you can tell by the fizzle, it is definitely a bombastic combo that sometimes you need the snapshot, sometimes you don't need the snapshot. But I've got a video that's going to be covering this deck in particular that I'm very excited for. So check out the YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe, yada, yada, yada. But what exactly is going on here? This is Insanity Fatigue Warlock, where the whole point of the deck is to build up your fatigue counter to where encroaching Insanity and Pop Guard Crescendo combos are going to be the way that you win the game. I'm not going to explain this deck too thoroughly because this is a deck that takes a lot of practice and honestly a lot of understanding in order to understand how it wins. But one thing to keep in mind is that your encroaching Insanity essentially ramps up your imp cards or your fatigue cards. So if you play this on turn 3, you hit your first fatigue and your second fatigue to where your next fatigue card is now going to deal 3. So your crescendo is now dealing 3 damage, your baritone imp is gaining +3/+3, or your conductor is summoning 3 3/3s. Really good for tempo, right? Like if you've got the 1, 2, 3, 4 curve, like that is just a lot of minions onto the field, and now you can meaningfully trade, mitigate the board, and you're going to be controlling your opponent with your board, so that way you can build up this gigantic combo. Because as you continue to play more fatigue cards, as you continue to play more encroaching insanities, while also preventing the fatigue with cards like Fellstring Harp as well as Void Virtuoso, your crescendos are going to deal ridiculous amounts of damage. Like I've actually gotten my crescendo to deal 9, almost 10 damage one game. It's very, very crazy. And the thing is with Pop Guard, your crescendos are suddenly having lifesteal attached to them, to where even if you deal lethal damage to yourself while playing the crescendo, the lifesteal is going to bring you back. So Pop Guard is the main win condition of this deck with crescendo, to where you can do like a gigantic crescendo combo, play the sludges from the Pop Guard, and even you even have mana to play the Trog Gem Tosser afterwards, after you've completely wiped out the board, to where you can deal like another 8 to 10 damage. So there's a lot of potential with this deck. That's a very basic synopsis of this deck, but the most important tip that I can give you is mastering the mulligan. Now, one more thing that I want to talk about with this deck before we move on to the next list. I particularly have not liked the Scarab, and there's one card that I feel like actually fits perfectly here, and it's actually right in front of us. It's Sketchy Artist. The reason why I love this card is because yes, you can get an additional copy of the Encroaching Insanity and play it immediately, but sometimes you just want to tutor it from your deck, and honestly, I just don't know a better card to put into the deck right now, just because the Scarab doesn't really seem to be that good. Defile could very easily be the last card in this deck if you really want to worry about Hunters. And honestly, Hunter is supposed to be favored, but I went 1-4 against Hunter the last time I played this deck, maybe because I'm making some wrong decisions or mulliganing wrong, but Defile has some very legitimate uses in this deck that could replace the Sketch Artist depending on what exactly you want to counter. But I made this deck specifically to bully Warrior, so I wanted that extra copy of the Encroaching Insanity. I wanted that consistency. I wanted to draw through my deck and make sure that I bullied Warriors, and I went 5-0 against Warriors. So if you're someone that absolutely hates Bran, play this deck, bully the Warriors. Sketchy Artist is probably going to be the best 30th card if you don't want to put in Defile. But yeah, this is a great deck that has a lot of insane skill testing situations to catch, to be aware of. And just a really fun deck. And honestly, this has quickly become my favorite deck in WHIZBANG'S Workshop. Next up is debatably the best deck at Top Legend, to where top players are still saying that Dragon Druid is good. Dragon Druid is good. It's pretty decent, man. But yeah, the one thing that I really feel like I have to bring attention to is that there are some people that are playing Clay Matriarch, and I'm not going to show the list on screen, but I will include it in the description below so that way you guys can copy the deck. But personally, the reason why I do not like Clay Matriarch is because of the consistency of the scale replica being able to draw the Zarimi. But there is some real legitimacy behind the Clay Matriarch, because this deck just doesn't kill you by turn 5, turn 6 anymore. So this is more of a mid-range deck that needs a little bit more minions and sometimes taunts in order to survive, to build the Zarimi. And this sometimes can be 2-for-1 dragon, you know? It's got the miniature attached to it. So that might be a pretty decent reason to include this in the deck. Plus, the Clay Matriarch can be a minion you can copy with the Pip, so there might be some potential for that as well. But personally, I just like Starlight Whelp. The reason why I like this card more than the 6-drop is because I can just play this by turn 3 as just, you know, a good minion. It's a dragon that can give me another dragon, and every now and again you can find another Ziliax, you can find another Amanthul. Sometimes you'll find another Zarimi, but then when you get dirty ratted and you still have a Zarimi left over because one Zarimi was taken out of your hand, but because the Whelp gave you another one, like, there are times where the Whelp does feel like it has more high roll potentials than just the Clay Matriarch just being a 6-mana dragon that you just play as a taunt. So that's the reason why I'm going to be recommending the Starlight Whelp. But again, if you want both lists, Vicious Syndicate apparently is very much hyping up the Clay Matriarch deck, while I am going to be hyping up the Starlight Whelp deck. But again, Dragon Druid is good. If you're someone that likes minion-based priest strategies, then this deck is still kicking it. It's still the best at Top Legend. It just takes a little bit more finesse, and unfortunately, the lower game meta can be a little bit volatile towards it, but it's all about making sure that you are playing this matchup perfectly, because it's not just about, you know, unga-bunging the minions as quickly as possible. It's about trying to keep your board as healthy as you can while getting rid of your opponent's board, so that way you stick a board as many times as you can. Sometimes I feel like people overtrade with a kind of deck like this, but you just really got to make sure that you are getting those value trades, you're getting as much value from your mains as possible, and always save for a hilarious Clemson Clergy Funnel Cake combo. Next up is kind of a throwback in all honesty, but there's a legitimate reason to play Sky Mother Aviana. So any deck that plays this, I'm going to showcase it because I've got Signature Aviana, and I want this card to be the best it possibly can. And this might be the best use of Aviana is actually in Dragon Druid. And the reason why Dragon Druid has been coming back recently is because decks like Paladin and Hunter have a really difficult time at being able to deal with gigantic taunts, gigantic swings in tempo, and even more taunts because you have things like Desert Nest Matron. The one thing that kind of sucks about Dragon Druid into those other strategies, though, is to where if you don't have your curve, you really don't win the game. So this is one of those strategies that's very important to draw your cards in the proper order, because if you don't have like Flower Child coming out by like, you know, your 5th mana crystal in order to draw your dragon golems, then this deck can sometimes struggle every now and again. But if you look at the list, we've only got 4 spells in the deck with Dragon Tails and Innervate, so that way we have a legitimate reason of playing Magatha. It's just, this deck actually feels a lot more powerful than you would originally think, because I know looking at this, it feels like how does this deck even possibly win? But the main ways that we are going to win is by having Nest Matron into Drake, stop the early game tempos, Chia Drake in order to draw your Innervates, so that way you can potentially play your Dragon Golem a little bit sooner. Sky Mother Aviana is probably just a card that is more so in the deck in order to play around Warriors, because Sky Mother Aviana is a great way of playing around Boom Boss, because you have a bunch of bombs being shuffled into your deck, and now you have cards that sometimes might be good to burn from the TNT, but it's more so just adding cards into your deck so you're more likely to not draw the TNT. So that's another reason I like the Sky Mother Aviana. But Take to the Skies to draw your dragons, so that way your whelps can get consistency for the ramp. I feel like this deck has a lot of potential, and someone did hit rank 1 with this last season, so not even during this new reset. Someone actually played this deck to rank 1 on EU and did very well with it. So if you want to play some Dragon Druid and relive some nostalgia and protect the Titans, then go ahead and try out this list, because it might be a lot stronger than you think it might be. Next up, we have what is probably going to be the best Rogue deck if you want to play a good Rogue deck and actually win games, because Rogue has a lot of interesting strategies that unfortunately just fall extremely flat. But this really isn't going that crazy. This is probably the safest direction that the Mining Rogue package has been going. There's a lot of really weird inclusions that I've been seeing recently, and I got one more deck from DeadDraw, which I believe is not that different from this list, but it's slightly different, to where, you know, Mining Rogue is a good deck. I feel like the only thing that's really preventing this deck from seeing play is the fact that you really gotta know what you're doing. You gotta know when to play for combo, when to play for tempo. The biggest piece of advice that I can give for Rogue players, or for Mining Rogue players in general, is to not just focus on your tempo. You need to make the most awkward plays for your opponent almost every single turn. The reason why this deck can fail is because a lot of players like myself will just focus on doing maximum tempo, playing onto the field, just throwing everything, focusing on getting the Scorpion down as quickly as possible. And sometimes you're not thinking about like the Sonya doubling up on with the 1-mana spells on the Scorpion. You're just thinking about, I need to deal damage, I need to throw these cards out, I need to keep throwing things at my opponent to make them play more things to react to me. And sometimes what you'll do is you won't save the right card for Sonya that you want to double up, and sometimes that can really hurt you, because with this deck in particular, you have Tez. So if you end up playing the same card twice, like let's say like a Hellfire or something, in a situation to where we don't care about our HP, imagine a situation to where you can guarantee double Hellfire to end the game because you played Tez Greymane. So that's kind of the situation that I'm talking about, to where you really got to think about what you're doubling up and what you could potentially double up with Sonya, and then there's going to be those thresholds to where if you're waiting for the Sonya and then you don't have it, you're just gonna have to play it. So this is a high risk, high reward sort of deck, to where it really rewards you for understanding how specific matchups should be played. So against Warrior, you want to make it very awkward to the board, to where you're not just flooding the entire board with 7 minions, maybe like a sweet spot of like, you know, 2 to 4 minions depending on how big they are. You want to save some of your burst combos for the Sonya. You want to save your Shadow Steps and some of your break dances for your Velorok combos, but you got to use them flexibly with some of your other cards in case you need to like double up a Cold Neophyte to prevent a spell from answering your board. Like, this deck takes a lot of skill, and it takes a lot of practice in order to understand why you win against certain archetypes. It's not just flood the board, it's not just spam random spells. You have to spam your cards in a specific way. So hopefully this will give you a new way of being able to appreciate Mining Rogue that isn't just random bullshit go, even though it's pretty much what the deck does. Now, this version of the deck is from DeadDraw, and if you understand who DeadDraw is, then you already know that he is one of the best Hearthstone players around, because every single time, every single season, it feels like the guy takes a break, and then suddenly he comes back months later and is still top 50 legend. This dude is just absolutely cracked. So the reason I am showcasing this deck is because he runs the Frequency Oscillator, and he has more ways of being able to push onto the board, more cards to throw out a hand in order to make more room for the Scorpion Tez combos, to where I really don't know if this deck is better, but I like the idea of Pit Stop not just being an absolutely dead card because I drew the 2 mechs that it can discover. So maybe there's an argument behind the Frequency Oscillator. There's also, you know, the justification of if you play Frequency Oscillator on turn 1 and then you immediately end up top decking your Drilly, you do have the possibility of coining it out in order to prevent the quick draw from missing its opportunity, but that is by far the worst case scenario if we're talking about top decking Drilly and making Oscillator actually worth something. But cutting out the Antique Flinger seems like a pretty good idea. This card as a 2-of might be a bit clunky in my opinion, but one thing that's very interesting is the 1 Cult Neophyte. Kind of like what I was saying earlier with Sludge Warlock. Cold Neophyte, just, it seems like a really good card, but it's more of a bait tool, and it's more of like a noob tool, to where you can beat some noob decks with this card very effectively. But at top 1000 legend, or at top legend, if you end up playing Cold Neophyte, unless your opponent really needs to play a spell to counteract, they're just gonna play minions, and they're just gonna wait till the next turn to play a spell. So I think that this is a very interesting deck, and I really wanted to showcase it, because number one, DeadDraw is coming back to Hearthstone, but number two, Mining Rogue is always a really interesting archetype to analyze, because so many people come up with like these weird lists that have like 2 to 3 different cards that really push the deck in a different direction. And the main reason I'm showcasing this is because I like the idea of Frequency Oscillator giving you more ways of opening up hand space. So if you want to play Mining Rogue, you have a lot of good games coming up ahead, because this deck is not only entertaining, but it's also very skill testing and really lets a good player show how good they can be. So we got 2 more decks in order to close out the best decks at top legend, but unfortunately, this is really just a deck that is only good at top legend if you are specifically TicTac_HS. Don't forget to check out his stream, because the dude's absolutely killing it with the content game recently. He's playing the most interesting decks, the most skill-based and most skill-intensive decks that I've ever seen, and is somehow making them look like you're riding a bicycle with training wheels. Like, this dude just knows how to play good Hearthstone, and I know a lot of people are looking at this deck being like, all right, Clark HELLSCREAM, what's the combo? There are lots of combos with this deck, and that's why I really hate that I'm showing this deck without really playing it, because I understand theoretically what can happen, but what I'm actually going to suggest is that you guys go to Twitter, check out TicTac's Twitter, and you need to see the clips of him playing this deck. I am not going to spoil it, because I want to drive traffic to his channel and to his Twitter page. So this is me asking you guys to check them out, because trust me, if you love my content and if you love interesting decks, you will love TicTac being the best player playing the goofiest decks imaginable right now. So what exactly is this deck trying to do? It is trying to do an Elonius combo, but it's also got the ENR combo with the cover artists in order to really give you a gigantic healing turn, a gigantic draw turn, and maybe even like a combo setup depending on how you use the ENR refresh. Now this is a deck where theoretically you can play the ENR, draw a bunch of cards, you can cover artist once on the ENR, but then the second cover artist you want to try and use on your Elonius, so that way you could have some kind of ridiculous spell damage combo with your vials, your swipes, your funnel cakes, as well as your living roots. So this is just one of those decks to where you really got to understand the mana thresholds, you got to understand the combo, to where I really cannot explain how to play this deck properly. But what I can do is give you guys the perfect 30. TicTac has literally played 100 games with this deck since the patch has gone live and has a 60%, so I really don't know how better to sell this deck. Check out TicTac's channel. I know I keep telling you guys to do this, but seriously, I don't have the knowledge to tell you how to play this deck. I only have the knowledge of what the deck is. So check out his channel, check out the insane combos this deck can do, because trust me, I am not exaggerating when I tell you that you are going to be massively impressed with what this deck can do. So check out TicTac's channel. Please, do it. Do it now. And last and most certainly not least, because even if Nature Shaman was the worst deck in the game, I would never call it the least deck, because Nature Shaman is still good. I'm not going to spend too much time talking about this deck, because if you've watched these videos, you already know what I think about Nature Shaman, and you already know I think it's one of the most skill-based decks available right now. The only deck that's about as hard as Nature Shaman is legitimately Owl Druid, and Owl Druid might be harder than Nature Shaman in some instances. So if you want this deck to be good, it's good, it's playable. This is the version of the deck to be playing. Golganeth is still absolutely king. We still need Fizzle, because we need to double up our damage sometimes, and every now and again we have to play to not die, because that's the most important thing with Nature Shaman. You gotta keep yourself alive, which means you can't just hoard on to all of these combo tools until suddenly you can just blah them away. That's not how Nature Shaman works. You gotta sometimes throw away a pop-up book in order to play defensively. You sometimes gotta lightning bolt a minion to not just take a bunch of damage and immediately die. And every now and again, you have to YOLO the draws, because you just don't have a better thing to do. So Nature Shaman is good. It's still playable. If you want this deck to be good, win with it. It's a good deck. Next up, I'm going to be showing you guys 11 different fun decks that you can play and still win with, mostly. The first couple decks that I'm going to show you guys are going to be the best decks. It's not necessarily in the order of strongest to weakest, but I would say that most likely the decks that I'm going to be showcasing at the top of this list are going to be better than the ones at the bottom of the list. So it's like, good lists, still good, kind of goofy, and then we're gonna start getting goofier as this list goes down. So we got 11 goofy decks to get through, and if you like goofy decks, you should be subbing to the content right now. I'm gonna keep saying this. You gotta sub. You gotta do it, man. Who else gives you 25 deck lists when they promise 5? Everybody gives you 5 decks. I give you 25. That is the Clark HELLSCREAM difference. And you wanna know what else is the Clark HELLSCREAM difference? Playing a legal deck when this deck is technically a bug. Now again, I can't say the bug. We already know what the bug is. You're not going to get punished for playing it as of this point because it's going to get patched very, very soon. But still, I wanted to take it upon myself to not play Alex and to not just automatically win the game by cheating. So I decided to go the full distance and actually suck my opponent completely dry like a vampire, or like that 1X that you know about. So yeah, Snake being 7 damage instead of 10 means that you have to play the Snake at least 5 times if you are going to kill somebody from 30 HP. And this deck is probably my coup de grace of homebrew decks. I made this deck by myself with a little bit of help. I had a little bit of help making this archetype because somebody enlightened me to how good endgame with Drill Fist is. It is a great way of being able to get those excavates as quickly as possible to where sometimes you don't even have to worry about bouncing the Snake because you know you're going to have plenty of excavates to get yet another Snake. So this is a deck to where you can play a little bit for tempo at the beginning of the game and then kind of shift to like a weird interactive combo deck, but you still have plenty of control tools with cards like Defile, Mortal Eradication. Reverb is very good at playing defensively, but you can also use it on your Drill Fist. So there's honestly a lot of interesting decisions that this deck can present, and honestly I got an entire deck showcasing the legitimate version of this deck if you want to see it in action. But the last time I played this deck, I went 16-5 with it. It was completely unbelievable that I did so well with it. It was actually not that bad into Warrior, but it's not the counter to Warrior. But Snek Warlock is a legitimate deck to where if you feel like this deck got nerfed way too soon, because it kind of did, but it was kind of justified, now you have a way of being able to play it to where it feels like a really good deck that could easily be tier 3 if it wasn't for all the aggression that we're seeing on the ladder right now. Next up, we got a spicy Jambre OTK Highlander deck. And I know I hate Highlander, but here's the reason why I'm going to defend this deck. This deck is based because it is all about trying to play Shutter Block in combination with Hagatha. Now, if you play Hagatha and you have your Wish Upon a Star, Shutter Block into Wish Upon a Star can give your minions +6/+9. Nice. Very, very, very nice. And the coolest thing about this deck is that you have an Alakir Windlord combo, but you've also got South Sea deckhands in the deck. So this deck is really trying to go all in on doing like Handbuff Shaman shenanigans to where, yeah, there's probably a better Highlander Shaman, but this is the cooler Highlander Shaman. Like this is the based Highlander Shaman, as I would like to call it, because it's all in on trying to make your minions have +6/+9. That's just cool, man. I don't know how else to describe it. Like, if that doesn't make you want to play this deck, you're never going to play Wish Upon a Star. You're never going to play interesting Shaman decks because you just want to play the good decks, which I understand. But this is goofy. This is funny. I love the idea, and it still has like the rest of the Highlander package to still debatably call it a good deck. So if you want to play Highlander and be a little bit goofy while doing it, this deck from Jambre is probably the most based way of playing Highlander decks right now. This next deck might be a little bit, I don't want to say controversial, but I feel like some people are going to love it and some people are going to be like, oh god, not this deck again. But the biggest thing about Handbuff Paladin right now is the fact that this deck just feels pretty good. Like, it's the most minion-based, just play minions, they do things, and you just kind of wait for things to happen. Because there's not a lot of spells in this deck. In fact, there's actually 0 spells in this deck. Wow, the only spells that you can generate are from the Excavates and the Observer of Myths. But this is a card that makes all in hand buff work. Musclotron, my card reveal, finally getting some love. Let's go. But yeah, Musclotron is pretty good right now. And it's very interesting to see that we're going all in with hand buff, even though the weapon is definitely still the bread and butter of this deck and really makes it sing. So we have the consistency of the instrument tech, being able to draw it. We have a speaker stopper in this deck in order to give us a little bit more game against like Nature Shaman and against other spell decks. Being able to lock out a rogue, for example, could sometimes be good, so that way you don't get scammed by like a Scorpion. So I like like the idea of the one Speaker Stomper and no Cult Neophyte, but the rest of the deck makes sense with like all the Excavate cards that are just trying to buff up the stats of this deck as easily as you can. And honestly, I haven't played this deck yet, but I feel like this might be the most fun way of playing Paladin because it's all in on the board. It has cool comeback capabilities, and it's not a simple, straightforward deck like it used to be, where we're just gonna keep buffing and then we're just gonna charge to the face. No. You gotta play your Excavate cards. You gotta think about your turns a little bit more. And I just now realized that there is a Shroomscavate in the deck, so technically Magatha can low roll, but Shroomscavate's a bad card anyway. Who cares if you give it to your opponent, right? But regardless, this seems like a deck that might have a lot of potential, but I feel like a lot of people just feel like that Handbuff Paladin, they immediately hear that and they're like, I want to steer clear from this deck. But honestly, if you're someone that likes board-based gaming, Handbuff Paladin might be your favorite deck and you just don't know about it yet. The next deck that we're going to go over is Highlander Druid, and the reason why I am showcasing this specific list is because one person in my Discord in particular was able to take Highlander Druid out of the diamond ranks and actually climb to about top 5,000 legend after not really being a legend player all too consistently. So he really used this opportunity to test his abilities, and he did very well. He says that the deck is very favored against Highlander Warrior. All these claims and all these comments are in our Discord, by the way, and the deck list tab, so you can kind of see like the evolution of the process of this deck that led to his final result. But this deck is very different than some of the other Vicious Syndicate decks, and I haven't really looked at them, but I'm going off of the word of the guy that made this deck, so if I'm wrong, I do apologize. But the thing I kind of like about this deck that might actually get me to try it is just, it feels good that Raza can actually be a meta powerhouse again. But the biggest issue with this card is the fact that Reno, just again, another reason to absolutely despise Reno on a freaking design level, because nothing is safe, nothing is sacred. I just absolutely despise this card. I'm gonna keep using every opportunity I can to shit talk this card because I absolutely freaking hate it. But at least Raza gives you the infinite dragons and does give you like a reason to play Highlander outside of playing who is the forbidden card and the name, by the way. But the other thing that's kind of cool about this deck is that we have cards like Panther, which is good for tempo, so we can try to like knock out some of the other mid-range decks. Feels like a very good card in that aspect. We have Take to the Skies in order to draw cards like our Whelps. We have the Chia Drake in order to draw the spells, which are very important. But one very interesting card is actually the Saloon Brewmaster, and this is in the deck for a spicy reason. It's there for the Sky Mother. The reason why this guy really wanted to do the bounce Sky Mother combo is specifically to screw over Warrior and to prevent the Boom Boss TNTs from destroying your deck and destroying what you've built up onto the board. Because every now and again, like, you don't really care about the cards in deck and cards in hand going away, but if your board dies, like, that's kind of a big deal. And I don't think TNT deletes Raza. That wouldn't really make sense. But if that is something that can happen, then oh boy, then yeah, you really want to prevent those TNTs from happening. But I'm pretty sure that that Raza location does not get affected by TNT, nor would like the Sarg portal. But if you're somebody that really wants to play Highlander decks right now, this might be one of the most interesting builds to play at the moment, because Druid feels like it's so close from being like a tier 1 deck. I don't know if it's just like something is missing in the deck or if it's the metagame surrounding it, but I really do believe that Highlander Druid could be the best Highlander deck if Bran eventually gets nerfed. So I would say if you really want to like put in some time with the deck and then it'll become much better as we get some more nerfs, then Highlander Druid might be a high stonk Hearthstone deck to start practicing. Next up is going to be my personal favorite Highlander archetype, and that's because it's not about the Reno, but it kind of is. It's more so about Raza the Resealed, and the reason why I love this card is because I love the original Razakis Priest. Call me toxic, I don't care. It was a fun deck. Being able to play Prophet Velen in a legitimate way that wasn't just, you know, playing as many copies of Prophet Velen as possible, I liked that a lot. I loved Prophet Velen with the hero power doubling it up and then just playing a bunch of spells at killing my opponent. That was probably one of my most active moments in the Hearthstone community during that season, during 2018. So yeah, lots of good memories with Raza, and this is like the closest version to Raza Priest that we're gonna be able to get in Standard. And there's honestly two different ways of being able to kill our opponent. We have the Adonis combo that can be possible in case you don't have the Reno that gets drawn, and we have cards like the Careless Crafter in order to give us 0 amount of bandages, so we do have ways of restoring that hero power a bunch of different times. And since we do have cards like Sing Along Buddy and Papercraft Angel, there are lots of ways of being able to make Adonis work by himself. But unfortunately, if you've played a deck like this, one win condition is unfortunately not good enough. And if we're already gonna play the Highlander archetype anyway, we might as well include the most busted AoE that's ever been printed. But the reason why we're playing Reno is not because of his stupid I hate his ability so much. I hate the design. The reason we're playing Reno is not because of the ability. We're actually playing him because we want the Arcane Bullet. If we can get the Arcane Bullet, then cards like the Sing Along Buddy and the Papercraft Angel can create the most hilarious OTKs, which I have yet to do, but I just posted a video talking about this deck to where I had one of the most insane games ever. I'm not gonna ruin it. You should just check out the video because Highlander Priest is very good, honestly. I feel like this is a deck that not a lot of people are playing, and everybody, when they're making Highlander Priest, is trying to make it a control deck with cards like Elise, running like Yogg, and running like all these AoEs. It's a control deck. This is a combo deck. This is very similar to old wild decks, I would argue, to where you're just trying to cycle through your deck, play minions that just draw cards, and then eventually you hit those big powerhouse turns to help set up that combo. But this is essentially more of like a tempo combo Miracle Priest than anything else, because you do have control cards with cards like Ruin, Harmonic Pop, Amanthul, obviously Reno, and cards like Holy Nova. But the real power of this deck is just being able to draw with cards like Panner, getting our minions with Creation Protocol, playing for tempo, and just being on the board. So this deck is just trying to play for the board in the early game and then just continuously draw in order to get its key combo cards. So Raza Priest is probably the coolest Highlander deck that is available right now, but no one is playing it because everybody has to put the no duplicate cards into their deck if they're ever going to make Highlander, which makes sense, but I really do believe that Elise is probably one of the worst Highlander cards right now, even though it can be good. It's just not that good on average, and I believe this is probably going to be the best way of playing Highlander Priest. Next up, we have the brand new APM Scam Rogue that some people are just affectionately calling Shit Rogue. Yeah, I know. It's not a very creative name, but it's still kind of funny if you think about it. The reason why they're calling this deck Shit Rogue is because if you are a newer player, you are going to have an absolutely terrible win rate with this deck. This deck is not good, unfortunately. Unless you are someone like Pocket Train or TicTac that can literally think into the freaking future somehow and predict the absolute best plays because they just know what Hearthstone is. But honestly, this is a bit of a meme version of the deck to where I told Pocket Train about this and he's like, I wanted to tear my eyes out when you posted about Ignis and Watcher of the Sun. And you know what? I totally get that. If you are good enough with this deck, these are like training wheels, and I completely, you know, admitted that when I made this video talking about the deck. But honestly, I think Watcher of the Sun does have some potential because healing in Rogue, as well as, you know, just sometimes you die against board-based decks. Sometimes the healing is necessary. But if you don't want to play this deck, in fact, I would highly recommend playing this other version. Even if you watch my video, I literally say the opposite. But Mike drop in this deck is still good card draw, and you just need to draw through the list in order to get the good cards. The main reason I put in the minions was because of Elven Minstrel. But here's the thing about Elven Minstrel. You just need to draw the minions that are in the deck already. You don't care about getting the Elven Minstrel value. And even if you've already played one Elven Minstrel and you've played all your minions, you might have a situation to where you play Gear Shift in order to shuffle those minions back into the deck, and then you can immediately draw them back with the second Elven Minstrel. So trust me, this is going to be the perfect 30 in how to play the deck. As much as I really wanted to make the Forge combo cards work, they're just a bit too much of a setup in a deck that already has a bit too much going on right now to where you really can't change out any piece of this deck. The whole point of this deck is to play the Scoundrel, get the 1 mana Scoundrel to where you can play 1 mana Scoundrel into Sonya, Shadow Step the 1 mana Scoundrel, play it, play Cover Artist onto the Sonya, which gives you a 1 mana Sonya. Because this card was played for 1 mana, it makes Sonya, which Sonya will make another Sonya, so you can play a third Sonya, so then you can play Valera's Gift and then get a bunch of deadly poisons, and now you're starting to understand what the deck is trying to do. It is a scam deck because it is just trying to do one thing very well, but the reason why it can work very well is because you have cards like Deafen in order to get rid of taunts, and you also have Tar Slit combos with cards like Fan of Knives in order to actually deal with the board. So this deck has a lot more legitimacy than some people may want to give it credit, but this is a hard deck to play. So do not play this deck if you are trying to actively grind unless you think that you are a Hearthstone 10 head, because that's what it takes. You're going to need 10 different people looking at this deck to figure out how to win with it originally. But once you figure out the combo, this deck becomes a lot easier to win with. It's just about surviving and knowing if you had a chance of winning to begin with. Next up is probably going to be one of the worst decks on this list because honestly, I just have no idea how to even make this deck work. I have only seen streamers do terribly with this deck. I don't really know why we buffed the Sunset Volley to 9 mana other than just to kill Tendy decks, because this is just what the buff did. Like, it didn't make this deck any better. This deck is still very bad right now, but the whole point of this deck is trying to play like a manufacturing error in order to get, you know, discounts on your spells. Think of this like a Skolo Gul'dan in Mage if you have no minions in your deck. But the biggest issue with this deck is that it just does nothing. It does a bunch of nothing. You can't really put minions onto the board. If you want to play cards like Elemental Inspiration, then you kind of have to go in a completely different element with this deck by putting in like all the Discover cards, like Discovery of Magic, just to kind of make this synergy not even work. It's like, I feel like the only way to really play this deck is to somehow make this work with like Yogg in a box and play like Orb a bunch of times, but you can only play Orb like 1 time. So it's like, I really don't understand how this deck can even win a game. Like, I'm very confused on what it even counters, and especially with Reno being the main flavor of a lot of decks right now, I just don't see this deck being good. Like, there might be a possibility to where, like, if you play double manufacturing error and you have like Molten Rune, Stitch, and like a bunch of other cards that cost like 0 mana, then like you could forge the Molten Runes and this could deal like 12 for 0, but that is such a Christmas Land perfect situation that is just never gonna happen. And it's like, I feel like the only reason why this card got buffed was just to screw over Tendy decks. So I don't like Spell Mage because of that reason, because it killed my Tendies, but also this deck is just really bad. So if you guys have a better idea for a Spell Mage for a video that I can make, please let me know, because this archetype is probably one of the worst archetypes other than like Pirate Rogue right now. And Pirate Rogue did get buffed as well, but it's still a really bad deck. It's so bad that I haven't even put it in this section of the video. That's how bad Pirate Rogue is. But this deck might be a little bit better than Pirate Rogue because you have scams with Yogg in the box. And honestly, that's just the only reason to play this deck. Just play the box, see what happens, and hopefully it gets you a W somehow. Next up is going to be a kind of interesting deck that I have already made a video about. If it hasn't been posted yet, it will be posted soon. But Mech Warrior. The reason I want to showcase this deck is because another viewer on my stream has been doing very well with this deck, albeit it is not the best warrior deck by any means. This is definitely a meme. This is definitely a funny deck that actually has a very consistent way of being able to pop off this combo, because you have a lot of card draw, but specifically you have quality assurance in order to guarantee the testing dummy. This is all in on trying to make the testing dummy work with cards like Boom Wrench, as well as Wreck 'em and Deck 'em, and even cards like Battle Worn Faceless to try and make extra copies of the dummy. And even if the dummy dies, you have the Inventor Boom to bring back extra copies, and you even have gone so far to put in Crimson Expanse in this deck. So you are doing everything in your power to make as many testing dummies as you can. I believe it's literally every single copy card that isn't like a Faceless Manipulator is already in this deck. But yeah, I have a deck guide coming out about this very quickly, but it's just a deck that unfortunately is very all or nothing. Like, you will either play this deck, play the testing dummy by like turn 4, turn 5, which is possible because of Frequency Oscillator. If you play this card that early and then it sticks, you will start to believe that this is probably one of the best decks to be playing right now. But unfortunately, if you have any disruption that happens, if your opponent plays cards that make your cards cost more mana, if you draw plagues like I did when I played this deck, then yeah, it's very easily disruptible to where if you miss one of those key turns, it really does limit what you can do. But this is still a fun deck if you're somebody that wants to like play this against a friend and show them the power of the testing dummy, and to show that you are a testing dummy yourself, because that's what we are doing. That's what we are playing Blizzard 100 games nowadays. Yeah, like Testing Dummy might be a fun deck for you to play against friends, but do not play this deck on ladder because you will have a very unpleasant time with all the Renos and all the disruptions and all the ways of just invalidating this deck. Well, it looks like I lied to you guys because I didn't delete Pirate Rogue from my decks, and I guess it is making it into the video, so you guys are welcome. I already said that this deck wasn't good if you checked out the Spell Mage portion of the video already, but oh my gosh, dude. The reason why this deck isn't good is because you really need to hit the key turns in order for this deck to even have a chance. Like, Crystal Cove getting buffed is definitely good for this deck, but it's really the only way this deck can win is if you have, like, a turn 1 into something on turn 2, into Crystal Cove on turn 3, into either Water Cannon on turn 4, or potentially like a Bargain Bin Buccaneer on the next turn that you play your Crystal Cove. So it's like, there is some potential for this deck to have some major like high roll capabilities, but the major issue is that if you don't hit those high rolls, this deck just does nothing. It is all in on trying to make ideas work that just simply are way too slow and way too clunky right now. I can't believe I'm calling an aggro deck clunky, but that's what this deck is. If like the Treasure Distributor is probably a really nutty buff and wild, but the reason why it's not that good, at least not yet in standard, is because there's just so much removal to where this minion is never gonna stick to where you have like a gigantic turn that has a bunch of value on top of it. And we've even put in the gold, the Shoplifter Goldbeard because there is a possibility of doing things with like 1 mana Scoundrel into 2 mana Goldbeard into a bunch of other cards. But again, like this is very Christmas Land perfect situations that we're talking about here, and this deck is just weak. It is weak. I am only putting this on the deck list so I can actively dissuade anybody from trying it, but if you're really trying to play this deck, this is probably going to be the way to go about it. But this is just really a miserable experience because 1 or 2 AoEs, you're just dead. You have no way of coming back. There is no other tools in this deck in order to make it work if your board dies. We can't even like go for like a Valera's Gift combo in this kind of deck because then we're just playing a completely different deck entirely. So it's just like, if you want to play Rogue right now, I would highly recommend to avoid this deck like the plague. It's not good. It's very bad. Very, very bad. Next up is a pretty simple yet funny idea that I really wanted to squeeze into this video, but it is Wishing Well, and you can always wish for a better meta if you're never happy with the meta that you have, and I just mostly wanted to show off that joke. But the real power of this deck is actually within the Sonya. So the real reason why I am showcasing this deck is because if you do have Wishing Well and you have a bunch of coins that come down, then you can have your Sonya ready to go in order to turn those 1 mana legendaries into 0 mana legendaries, and the scam games that are possible are just really funny. I have not been able to live the sweet Wishing Well Sonya combo yet, but I'm hoping that it is something that I can bestow onto one of you guys if you really want to try and make this deck work. But yeah, Wishing Well Rogue, there's not really a lot to talk about. Gain the coins, get the Wishing Well, get greedy with the Sonya, and you also have Scoundrel combos, so potential to do some other things like getting the raiding party to draw the minions. You have 0 mana Velorock possibilities. Like, this deck is all in on Wishing Well. There's really nothing else to say. But if you want to play a fun archetype for Rogue that's all in on just letting the randomness be randomness, this is probably going to be your best bet, because what better way of saying YOLO, let Hearthstone take the wheel, than just throwing some coins down the Wishing Well. And the last deck that I'm going to put in this video is Casino Priest. Now, I haven't really played this deck since I had that insane highlight with the Hearthstone brew a couple weeks ago, but this is still a really fun deck that I feel like some people could still use in their life. And again, I put 11 different decks here. The only reason why I'm even showcasing this is because I've been too lazy to delete it from my collection, and it was just literally there. Every other deck in my collection right now has been something I've talked about, so here's the special bonus. Here's that number 11 that gives you that Clark HELLSCREAM seal of approval and extra content, because why not? You just want to hear me talk, right? You just want to hear me say how good Casino Priest is, right? Well, it is good, so you should play it. Totally not bait, by the way. Very fun deck, very extremely fun deck, and it's a base deck, and maybe it'll get you a girlfriend. I don't know. Maybe this is the kind of deck where like you're playing it, a girl walks past you, she's like, wait a minute, what is that? What is that? White class in Hearthstone, that pristine white class. I can't help but look at it's like I'm looking at the light of God getting closer to it. This deck will get you a girlfriend, and if you make it to this portion of the video, make sure that you say, thank you, Clark HELLSCREAM, for helping me find a girlfriend. Or who knows, maybe this deck will get you a boyfriend. I don't know. It's just one of those things. It's a base deck. You should play it. It's really fun, and honestly, it's just fun, and it'll get you a girlfriend. I don't know how many more times I can say this. Play this deck because it will get you a girlfriend. I'm totally not kidding, by the way. But now that the jokes are done, thank you so much for making it to the end of this video. We're just going to wrap it up very quickly by saying thank you for making it to the end. I don't need to say anything else. If you watch all the way to the end of the video, you are a true Hart Clark HELLSCREAM fan. And if you somehow made it to the end of this video without subscribing, go ahead and do that because we're giving away stuff at 18K, which you're so close to. So thank you so much to everybody for making it to the end of this video. Shout out to Patreon. Shout out to everybody that helps support the content. And I really hope that one of these decks gives you a way of enjoying Hearthstone right now, because there's a lot of changes that are happening. There's a lot of annoying mechanics, so to speak, but here's the thing about Hearthstone. It is whatever you make it, you gotta play the decks that you enjoy. You gotta not focus on what is bad about the game and what makes you upset about the game, because there are things that are fun in Hearthstone. You just gotta play them, you just gotta try them, and every now and again, you just gotta face it whenever a warrior plays Bran on 6 and Reno on 9. It's just the way the world goes. It may get nerfed soon, hopefully it will get nerfed soon, but regardless, thank you so much for making it to the end of this top 5 video, and we'll see you for the next one.